Greetings! My name is Brad Hessel, and I am the Forward Party and Libertarian Party candidate for North Carolina Senate in District 18 in 2024. I am asking for your vote in this election, so I figure I owe y'all an explanation as to who I am. I was born in Manhattan and raised in Westchester County, a few miles north of New York City. When I was young, my parents taught me 2 rules. 1, don't hit folks. 2, don't steal their stuff. There's an important exception to rule number 1, which my father invariably pointed out, if someone hits you first, of course. So I became interested in history and politics pretty early. The first election I remember was 1960. I was in 2nd grade, and Mr. Paul, our teacher, stapled magazine photographs of JFK and Richard Nixon on the class bulletin board. I was big for my age and growing fast, so there we were, Kevin Russell and I, standing in front of the bulletin board, me explaining why I was for JFK. I don't remember what I said, but it definitely wasn't the real reason, which was that my mother was virtually in love with him. And Kevin asks me about Mr. Nixon. Playfully, I reached out to pretend to tear that picture down, only both my reach and my grasp exceeded my intention. And the next thing I knew, Mr. Nixon was lying face down on the floor. I don't know who was more horrified, Mr. Paul, my mother, or me. It resulted in the first and last involuntary visit to the principal's office of my academic career. As a sophomore in high school, I was elected to the student council and co-founded a student union that militated for a seat on the local school board. The first year I could vote was 1972, and I worked on the McGovern campaign as a Peace Democrat, registering voters in deeply blue Manhattan, which my mother and I had moved back to by then. I graduated from college with a degree in history in 1975, and my first job was designing historical simulations for a Manhattan game company, which afforded me experience conducting detailed analyses while maintaining a broad perspective. That's experience that really helped me later. Then in 1980, I didn't like either establishment party alternative and donated $1,000 to the main third-party candidate, John Anderson. That's the equivalent of nearly $4,000 today, so I really didn't like the D's or the R's at that point. By 1984, I became so exasperated with the Democrats' identity politics and spendthriftiness, if that's a word, that I changed my registration from D to R. But I'd gotten married in 1980, and the first of 3 kids arrived in 85, so I pretty much put politics on the back burner for 25 years or so, during which time I co-founded the case tool company, Sear Technologies, 1990. We relocated from Brooklyn to Raleigh, 1992, along with Sear, although they actually moved from Manhattan to Cary. And I started my own knowledge management consulting practice in 1999. Okay, knowledge management, helping organizations to collect, sort, and redistribute information so that things run more smoothly. For example, if you have an international product and services company, you'd want prospects to be able to easily access information about the benefits you can provide, as well as the process for interacting with your company. You'd want your existing customers to be able to share best practices with respect to your offerings with each other. And you would want your sales and consulting staff in the field to have the latest intelligence not only about your own products and upcoming upgrades, but also about the competition. So, by the turn of the century, I was exasperated with the Republicans too. They talked a good game about reining in government spending, but generally, when they were in power, they ended up increasing the national debt as much or even more than the Democrats. Plus, they were much less tolerant than the Ds. The final straws were the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq following 9/11. Afghanistan! It's more a collection of squabbling tribes than a real country. The British had tried and failed there. The Russians had tried and failed there. How much more evidence did we need that attempting to nation-build Afghanistan was a terrible idea? I switched my registration from R to unaffiliated, the vaguely pejorative term we use for independent voters here in North Carolina. Then in 2007, I get a call from my brother-in-law, who still is in Baltimore, where the wife is from. He's a passionate Democrat, so you can imagine my surprise at the first words out of his mouth. "Brad, you gotta turn on the Republican debate." "Ralph," I said, "why are you even watching the Republicans? Anyway, the election's not until next year." "There's this guy and he's driving the other candidates crazy. Trust me, you've really got to see it," he insisted. So I turn on the TV, and there is Ron Paul up on the debate stage, explaining the concept of blowback. The common sense notion that poking a bear is likely to provoke a violent reaction. He's explaining blowback in connection with the motivations of the 9/11 hijackers. Dr. Paul pointed out that we'd been murdering folks in and imposing governments on Middle Eastern countries since 1953, when the CIA engineered the overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran. Poor Rudy Giuliani. Right there on national TV, his head explodes. "I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11th. He even demanded that Dr. Paul take it back. As the saying goes, the truth hurts. Well, I was long since not a Democrat, but still fervently anti-war. All I'd known about Dr. Paul up to then was that he was a practicing obstetrician in Texas and probably the best non-professional baseball player ever to serve in Congress. But now I was instantly hooked. I contributed to his 2008 run for president, and in 2012, I volunteered to work on his campaign. And after the GOP refused even to let Dr. Paul speak at their convention, it was a pretty natural move to switch over, along with a bunch of other folks here, to working for Gary Johnson, who had started 2012 running for president as a Republican on many of the same issues, but in the interim had been nominated by the Libertarian Party. So, at some point during that campaign, I related my two rules story to one of my fellow volunteers. "Oh my God!" he exclaimed. "Those are our two rules. You've been a libertarian since you were 3 years old and never realized it." Well, I like that, but what mostly attracted me to the Libertarian Party on a gut level was the combination of breathtaking tolerance for others, treat others the way they want to be treated, and uncompromising advocacy of individual freedom. Libertarians believe it's immoral to try to force your worldview on others who do not share it, whether you do that yourself or with a group, for example, via government laws and regulations. Shortly after the 2012 election, I switched my registration again, this time from independent to libertarian. And then the fellow who ran the Johnson campaign in North Carolina, Jason Melahany, invited me to a meeting of the Wake County Libertarian Party at the late, unlamented Gourmet Factory on Western Boulevard. The decor was dark and the fare more factory-ish than gourmet, but the people at the meeting were awesome. Back when number one daughter started first grade, we were still living in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Milena had tested into the gifted and talented program, and her class was comprised of a couple of dozen of the sharpest 6- and 7-year-olds out of the district's population of like 60,000 school-age kids. You did not need to spend too much time to become aware of the almost eerie level of intellectual power that was packed into that classroom. You could almost see the sparks igniting and smell the ozone. Frankly, it was a tad intimidating. Wake LP meetups were like that. Plus, there seemed to be a lot of spirited arguments about stuff that seemed, well, trivial. That also reminded me of Milena's first grade class. So my second ever Wake LP meetup was not at the Gourmet Factory, but rather in a classroom rented from NC State for the occasion. It was the January 2013 annual meeting of the party. And I'm still not quite sure how this happened, but I left that meeting having been elected as treasurer of the party, having just met most of those folks, having been a registered libertarian for only a few weeks. The thing was, their incumbent treasurer was moving to Oakland, and evidently, none of those really smart people wanted the job. To be honest, there really wasn't much to the job. In the 2 years previous, the party had raised a grand total of less than $150. In fact, there really wasn't all that much to Wake LP aside from the stimulating weekly meetings. They only ran one North Carolina General Assembly candidate in 2012 out of 16 Wake County seats. In 2013-2014, we raised $450, but did not run a single NCGA candidate. I was pretty distracted in 2014, serving that year as executive director of the state party. But then things began to pick up. We raised $3,250 in 2015-2016 and ran 7 NCGA candidates. In 2017-2018, we raised just short of $22,000 and ran 14 NCGA candidates. And in 2019-2020, my last term as treasurer, we raised $31,000 and had candidates in 13 out of the 16 Wake County seats. At that point, Wake LP treasurer had become real work, so I retired. Now my main focus has become helping to recruit candidates to run here in Wake County and managing professional services for their campaigns. $20,000 or $30,000 is not much in modern day politics, but it does enable us to provide our candidates with professional grade websites, a treasurer, and to help the more active ones produce and deploy yard signs and door hangers. We also coordinate responses to candidate surveys, organize canvassing door to door, keep track of events, and by the way, if you think you might consider running for office in Wake County as a libertarian, most def, ping me, please. So Wake LP are now on the map. The number of registered libertarians in Wake County has more than doubled from 2,600 at the end of 2012 to over 6,000 today. And our candidates typically draw significantly more votes than that, sometimes way more. In 2022, Brian K. Lewis garnered over 52,000 votes in his run for Soil and Water District Supervisor. In close races, our candidates often get more votes than the difference between the D and the R. That gets modest media attention and a lot of attention from establishment party political pros trying to figure out what issues are attracting so many voters. Okay, I could talk about Wake LP and what we aim to accomplish for hours, but I'm supposed to be talking about myself and how I got to where I am. Hopefully by now you have a pretty good idea. If you haven't already done so, please check out my website, electbradhessel.org. You can learn about the policies I'm proposing. You can also check out forthcoming events, volunteer to help with canvassing, donate to the campaign, request a yard sign, or just ask a question, make a suggestion, even lodge a complaint. Also, stop by Tobacco Road. We're on Jones Street in downtown Raleigh any Wednesday night from 7 p.m. to which you can attend a Wake LP meetup yourself. Unless we have a speaker, meetings are purely social with a wide range of topics: basketball, child rearing, love, anthropology, movies, psychology, history, and many more. Oh, and sometimes politics. Plus, there's good food and drink. Hope to see you there.